June 7th. Yesterday at 2 in the afternoon we made the Island of Gorgona. About 4 the body bore east-northeast 5 leagues. June 8th. Yesterday at 4 in the afternoon we got to an anchor, about a good cable's length from the shore in 30 fathom water, on the east side of the island. The southermost point of it in sight bore southeast about 3 miles, and the rocks off the north point bore north half west a mile and a half. June 8th. At 8 this morning we spied a sail to the southward of the island, between it and the main. Our pinnace being ashore for water, the Dutchess's boat went first after her, ours followed on the other side of the island, that if the prize bore away, she might meet her on the west side. In the meantime I took in water from the island. June 9th. Yesterday in the afternoon our boats returned and brought the prize with them, being a small bark of about 35 tons, called the Golden Sun. She belonged to a creek within this island on the main, and was bound for Guayaquil, Andros Enriquez master, with 10 Spaniards and Indians, and some negroes. No cargo, but a very little gold dust, and a large gold chain, together about 500 value, which were secured aboard the Dutchess. The prize designed to purchase salt and brandy with them. The prisoners said they had no notice of us, so that news does not spread in this country so fast as we believed, especially this way. The land being, as I am informed, full of woods and rivers, and bad for travellers or posts. About 6 in the evening there was a consultation on board the Dutchess, with some of my officers, Captain Dover and others. Being discomposed, I was not with them, but resolved to act in consortship, according to their agreement. After they had examined the prisoners, they resolved to go to Malaga, an island which had a road, where we designed to leave our ships, and with our boats row up the river, for the rich gold mines of Barbacore, called also by the Spaniards the mines of St. Juan, from a village about 2 tides up the river of that name. There we designed to surprise canoes, as fitter than our boats to go against the stream. For this time of the year, being subject to great rains, which makes a strong fresh down the river, our pilot, an old Spaniard, did not propose to get up to the mines in less than 12 days. I had often before suspected his knowledge, but according to their resolutions on board the Dutchess, we came to sail about 12 o'clock at night, and steered northeast for the place. In the morning I discoursed Captain Morrel, as I had done several times before, and all the rest of the prisoners, who agreed that this island, called Malaga, was an unfrequented place, and not fit for ships that ever they heard of. I also had 2 prisoners aboard that were taken in the last prize, who had been at the said island very lately. I examined 'em separately, and they agreed that a ship could not be safe there, and the place being so narrow 'twas impossible to get in, but with the tide, which ran very strong; that the entrance was full of shoals, and had not water enough, but at spring tides, for our ships to get out or in. Besides, that if a ship gets loose, as we must moor head and stern, she would turn all adrift, and very much endanger the whole. They added that the river was so narrow, before we could get to the mines, that the Indians and Spaniards might fell trees across, and cut off our retreat, there being thick woods on the banks of the river, from whence the Indians would gall us with their poisoned arrows; for those about the mines were in amity with the Spaniards, and a bold and a very numerous people. Upon this information I was surprised that the council had not informed themselves better before they resolved on going to this place, and immediately sent Mr. White, our linguist, with the 2 prisoners, on board the Dutchess, to undeceive Captain Courtney and his officers, and to desire his company with some of the rest without loss of time, that we might agree how to act for our safety and interest, and not to proceed farther on this hazardous enterprise. June 10th. Yesterday afternoon Captain Courtney and Captain Cook came aboard us. We immediately agreed to return to Gorgona to refit our prizes, and that there we would come to a final resolution. We saw the island at 6 in the evening, bearing southwest distance about 8 leagues. In the night we had much rain, with lightning and squalls of wind, by which the Havre de Grace lost her main topmast. This morning died Jonathan Smith, a smith by trade, and armourer's mate of our ship. I went on board the Havre de Grace and Dutchess, and lent them what was necessary for their assistance. Our men being very much fatigued, many of them sick, and several of our good sailors dead, we are so weak that should we meet an enemy in this condition, we could make but a mean defence. Everything looks dull and discouraging, but it's in vain to look back or repine in these parts. June 11. We had good soundings, but came no nearer the shore than 36 fathom water, it being uncertain soundings, and dangerous for ships to venture within that depth here. June 12. Had rainy Weather, with little or no Wind. At 8 this morning saw the Island of Gorgona, bore south half west, distant about 9 Leagues. We impatiently long to be there again at an anchor, being in an ordinary condition to keep the sea, though when there we are open to all advantages against us, if the enemy is out after us, which we expect, and that this is a place they will search, but having no other place so convenient, we must run the risk of it. June 13. About 4 in the morning we came to an anchor again at Gorgona in 40 fathom water, and most of both ships' officers having some thoughts of careening here. We held the following committee. Gorgona, 13th June, 1709. At a committee held on board the Duke. We have agreed on Mr. Lancelot Appleby to succeed Mr. Samuel Hopkins, and Mr. Robert Knowlesman to succeed Mr. John Rogers, who being deceased, these we approve as the fittest men to be members of a committee in their places. And having at the same time considered the necessity of cleaning our ships, we do desire Captain Courtney to use all manner of dispatch to get ready for a careen, and that the men and officers assist him as much as possible, and then he to assist the Duke as soon as his ship is completed, and off the careen, because one ship ought to be in a readiness to protect the other, whilst on a careen, in case we be attacked by the enemy. Thomas Dover President, Woodes Rogers, Stephen Courtney, William Dampier, Edward Cook, Robert Fry, William Stratton, Charles Pope, Thomas Glendall, John Connolly, John Bridge. While we were together, we agreed to fit out the Havre de Grace with 20 guns, and put men out of each ship aboard her, under Captain Cook's command, resolving to carry her home with us, and to make a third ship to cruise in our company whilst in these seas. June 14. I proposed before we should careen at Port au Penis, because it was an unfrequented place, and a good harbour, where we might lie some time undiscovered, and from thence go to the Bay of Panama when ready. But considering our present condition, everybody seemed most inclinable to stay here, which I the more readily agreed to, because it was pleasing to the rest, and that, if any casualty happened, I might not be reflected on, if I had over persuaded them to go elsewhere. We began according to agreement to careen the Dutchess first, and I to lie on the guard the meanwhile, in case of being attacked, which we had reason to fear, having been so long from Guiaquil. The Dutchess began to make ready for a careen. Captain Courtney and I went fishing together, and had pretty good luck, fish being plenty here. June 15th. We had indifferent fair weather, but very sultry. We put all our sick men, with our consorts, on board the galleon, being about 70 in number, besides sick officers, whom we put on board the Havre de Grace. June 16th. We built a tent ashore for the armourer and cooper, set several men to cutting of wood, and clearing a place for the sick men's tents. Nothing remarkable passed from the 16th, but that we had frequent thunder, lightning, and rain, which retarded our careening the Dutchess, till the 21st, that we finished her, and began upon our ship. We were forced to carry most of our stores ashore for want of barks, which are full of the Dutchess's provisions and materials. We seldom miss catching good fish daily, and keep a boat and men employed for that purpose, there being very little refreshment in the island. We spent till the 25th in careening, the sea swelling into the road hindered us heaving our keel wholly out, however we cleaned within less than 2 streaks of the keel, and being upright again. June 28th. We got our provisions aboard, and mounted all our guns, so that in 14 days we had caulked our ships all round, careened, rigged, and stowed them again, both fit for the sea, which was a great dispatch, considering what we had to do was in an open place, with few carpenters, and void of the usual conveniencies for careening. The Spaniards, our Prisoners, being very dilatory Sailors, were amazed at our Expedition, and told us, they usually take 6 Weeks or 2 Months to careen one of the King's Ships at Lima, where they are well provided with all Necessaries, and account it good Dispatch. June 29. Yesterday in the Afternoon we built a Tent ashore for the Sick, who are now much better than when we came to the Island, neither the Weather nor the Air here being half so bad as the Spaniards represented, which made us think 'twould be worse than we found it. This morning we got the sick Men into their Tents, and put the Doctors ashore with them. We unloaded the Havre de Grace, and chose a place very easy to lay her ashore, to clean her Bottom. A clear Sand about 1.5 miles from the place where we rode, near the South End of the Island. June 30. I went to her this morning, and left Captains Courtney and Cook, with the Carpenters, &c. to grave her Bottom, whilst I took the most experienced Prisoners, and walked through the Island, which is everywhere full of Wood, to look out Masts for her. The Spaniards knew best what Wood was most fit for this purpose here. We found one Tree proper to be a Foremast, having before that cut down a great Tree big enough, but a wrong sort of Wood. All the Timber here is too heavy, but we must use it, her old Masts and Yards being unserviceable, her Sails rotten, and very little of her Cordage fit to be used; so that it's near equal to rigging out anew. She is a very sharp Ship, but lies easily on soft red Sand, which is dry at little more than half tide. The Worms had not much damaged her Bottom, but her Rudder and Cutwater were eaten to pieces. It follows 15 foot at Spring Tides. July 1. We have Men employed in our Tents ashore to prepare the Rigging as fast as possible. A Rope maker at work to make twice laid Cordage, and a Smith, Block maker, and Sail maker at the same time, so that we want no Tradesmen to fit her out. Necessity makes us of all Trades on this occasion. The Natives of Old Spain are accounted but ordinary Mariners, but here they are much worse. All the Prizes we took being rather cobbled than fitted out for the Sea. So that had they such Weather as we often meet with in the European Seas in Winter, they could scarce ever reach a Port again, as they are fitted, but they sail here hundreds of Leagues. The French used her as a victualling Ship, and sold her at Lima, as they have done several others, for 4 times the money they cost in Europe. 'Tis certainly a good method they took at first trading hither, to bring a victualling Ship, with no other goods but Provisions and Stores along with 'em. Generally one of these small Ships comes out with 2 Traders, and since in 6, 9, or 12 months time, which they stay in these Seas, they expend their Provisions, and lessen their Men by mortality or desertion, they sell their victualling Ship, and being recruited with Men and Provisions out of her, they return well victualled and manned to France. But now they put into Chile, where they sell the remaining part of their Cargo, and salt up a new Stock of Provisions for their homeward bound Passage, so that they need bring no more Victuallers. July 2. We had Showers of Rain, with Thunder and Lightning last night, and few Nights are without Rain, but 'tis pretty dry in the Day time. This day I got a fine Tree for the Main Mast. The Island is so covered with Trees, that we are forced to clear a place for a Yard to work in. The Wood that we used for Masts and Yards is 3 sorts, but the best is Maria Wood, of the Colour and Grain of our English Oak, all of the Cedar kind, good Timber, but very heavy. There are several other sorts fit for Masts, but care must be taken not to use any that is short grained or soft and white when green. July 3. The Prize Flour we took in Bags being much damaged by the Rats, I ordered the Coopers to put it up in 36 Casks. The little English Bread we have left is eaten as hollow as a Honeycomb, and so full of Worms, that it's hardly fit for use. Last night we met aboard our Ship to consult of the quickest method for dispatch. The Officers agreed each to take his share of looking after the Ships, and forwarding the several Workmen. So that most of our little Commonwealth being ashore very busy, 'twas a diversion for me to oversee the several Companies at work in our Yard, from break of day till night, which otherwise in this hot Country would have been very burthensome to me. We were employed till the 9th in refitting the Havre de Grace, and when finished called her the Marquis. We saluted each of the other Ships with 3 huzzas from on board her, distributed Liquor among the Company, drank her Majesty's and our Owners' healths, and to our own good success. The Ship looked well, so that we all rejoiced in our new Consort to cruise with us. The next thing we did was to clear Mr. Selkirk's bark to carry our Prisoners to the Main, who, being 72 in number, were very chargeable to maintain; but we could not discharge them sooner, lest they should have alarm'd the Country, and inform'd the French and Spanish Men of War where to find us. But being now almost ready to depart, we call'd a Committee, and came to the following Resolutions. At a Committee held on board the Duke, riding at anchor in the Road of Gorgona, July 9, 1709. We think it convenient to turn all our Prisoners ashore in a Bark already provided for that purpose, and at the same time to plunder the Settlements on the Main opposite to this Island, and do desire Captain Thomas Dover, Mr. Robert Frye, and Mr. William Stratton to command the Bark and 45 Men on the same Expedition, and to make what dispatch they can, and return hither with such Refreshments, &c. as they can get for our sick Men. Thomas Dover President, Woodes Rogers, Stephen Courtney, William Dampier, Edward Cooke, Robert Frye, William Stratton, Charles Pope, John Connely, John Ballet, John Bridge, Lancelot Appleby. After this we gave them the following Instructions. Captain Thomas Dover, Mr. Robert Frye, Mr. William Stratton. Gorgona, 9th July, 1709. Gentlemen, we having agreed with you in a Committee, that you take a Bark under your care and transport our Prisoners to the Main, and having ordered about 45 Men under your command to proceed with you, and attempt the plundering where you judge most convenient. We only recommend the utmost dispatch, and that you keep in mind we hope to be ready in 8 days, and shall earnestly expect you as much as possible within that time. Other things relating to this you'll know better how to act than we can here direct. Should a powerful Enemy attempt us in your absence, we'll be certain to leave a glass bottle buried at the root of the tree whence the foremast was cut, to acquaint you, then Quibo is the place we will wait for you at, if we are well, and you must leave a glass bottle at this place in case we return hither again; but this we don't expect, if once chased away. Woodes Rogers, Stephen Courtney, William Dampier, Edward Cooke, William Bath, Charles Pope, Thomas Glendall, John Connely, George Milborne, John Bridge, John Ballet. July 10th. Early this morning we put our 72 Prisoners aboard the Bark. We had several times discoursed our Prisoners, the 2 Morels and Don Antonio, about ransoming the Goods, and were in hopes of selling them to advantage, but deferred coming to particulars, till now that we plainly saw, unless they could have the Cargoes under a quarter value, they would not deal with us. I proposed going to Panama, and to lie 6 days as near it as they pleased, till they brought the money we should agree for at a moderate rate, provided they left a hostage aboard us, whom on failure we would carry to England. To this they would have agreed, provided we would take 60,000 pieces of 8 for all the prize goods. Then I proposed their ransoming the Galleon, and putting good part of the goods aboard her, provided one of them 3 and another they could procure would be hostages for the sum. They answered that neither of them would go hostage to England for the world. Then I proposed delivering the Galleon and Cargo to them here, provided 2 of them would be ransomers to pay us the money at any other place but Panama or Lima in 6 days, if they would give us 120,000 pieces of 8, being the lowest price we could take for all the prizes and goods, negroes, etc. They told us that trade with strangers, especially the English and Dutch, was so strictly prohibited in those seas, that they must give more than the prime cost of the goods in bribes to get a license to deal with us, so that they could not assure us of payment unless we sold the goods very cheap. Therefore, not finding it worth our time, and knowing the danger we must run in treating with them, we desisted and ordered them all ashore, still hoping that this would necessitate the Morels and Navarre to get money for us, and prevent our burning the ships, and what we can't carry away. Everyone now wished we had kept some others of the topping Prisoners, to have tried whether they had a better foundation and method to trade, the goods being of little value to us here, and we must fill our ships so full, that we fear 'twill spoil our sailing. July 11th. Yesterday our Bark and 2 Pinnaces sailed with our chief Prisoners, Don Antonio, the Fleming, Señor Navarre, and the Morels, who did not expect to part with us so suddenly, but by continuing with us, and knowing we could not carry away all the prizes and goods, they hoped we should of course have freely given them what we could not keep. We apprehended that was the principal reason of their not closing with our returns, which were advantageous to them. Besides, should we have been attacked, they believed we must then put them in possession of their ships, which were of no use for fighting. But to obviate all their hopes of benefiting themselves at this easy rate, without our participating of their money, the magnet that drew us hither, I made them sensible at parting, that as we had treated them courteously like generous enemies, we would sell them good bargains for whatever money they could bring us in 10 days' time, but that we would burn what we did not so dispose of or carry away. They begged we would delay burning the ships, and promised to raise what money they could, and return within the time to satisfy us. One of the chief prisoners we now parted with was Don Juan Cardoso, designed governor of Baldavia, a brisk man of about 35 years of age. He had served as a colonel in Spain, had the misfortune to be taken in the North Seas by an English privateer near Portobello, and carried to Jamaica, from whence he was sent back to Portobello. He complained heavily of the usage he met with from the Jamaica privateer, but we parted very good friends, and he returned us his hearty thanks, and a stone ring for a present to one of the Dutchess's lieutenants that had lent him his cabin while he was sick on board. We allowed liberty of conscience on board our floating Commonwealth to our prisoners, for there being a priest in each ship, they had the great cabin for their mass, whilst we used the Church of England service over them on the quarter deck, so that the Papists here were the Low Churchmen. July 13. This morning our vessels returned from landing our prisoners, and brought off 7 small black cattle, about 12 hogs, 6 goats, some limes and plantains, which were very welcome to us. They met with little else of value in the village they were at, and the others being far up the river, they did not think it worth while to visit them. The country where they landed was so poor that our men gave the prisoners and negroes some bays, nails, etc., to purchase themselves subsistence. The inhabitants ashore had notice of our taking Guiaquil, and were jealous of our being at this island, because they heard our guns, when we fired in order to scale them after careening. This place bears southeast about 7 leagues from the body of Gorgona, is low land and full of mangrove trees. But within the country the land is very high. The river is hard to be found without a pilot, and has shoal water for above 2 leagues from shore. There are some poor gold mines near it, but the inhabitants agree that those of Barbacour are very rich, though difficult to be attempted, as we were informed before. July 16. Yesterday about noon came aboard one Michael Kendall, a free negro of Jamaica, who had been sold a slave to the village we plundered, but not being there when our people were ashore, he followed them privately in a small canoe, and the account he gave of himself was, that when the last war was declared at Jamaica, he embarked under the command of one Captain Edward Roberts, who was joined in commission from the governor of Jamaica with Captains Rash, Golding, and Pilkington. They had 106 men, and designed to attempt the mines of Jaco at the bottom of the Gulf of Darien. There were more commanders and men came out with them, but did not join in this design. They had been about 5 months out, when they got near the mines undiscovered. They sailed 15 days up the river in canoes, and travelled 10 days by land afterwards. By this time the Spaniards and Indians, being alarmed, laid ambushes in the woods, and shot many of them. The enemy having assembled at least 500 men, and the English being dismissed to about 60, including the wounded, the Spaniards sent them a flag of truce, and offered them their lives after a small skirmish, wherein the English lost 4, and the enemy about 12 men. The English being in want of provisions, quite tired out, and not knowing their way back, agreed to deliver their arms, on condition to be used as prisoners of war. Having thus yielded, the Spaniards and Indians carried them in the canoes 3 days up the river, that leads to the same mines they designed to attempt, treated them very well, and gave them the same food that they eat themselves. But the 4th day, when they came to a town beyond the mines, and thought all danger had been past, an order came from the chief Spanish officer to cut them all off, which the Indians and Spanish troops did, as those poor disarmed wretches sat at victuals, so that in this barbarous manner they were all massacred in a few minutes, except a Scots, a French, and an English boy, with 12 free negroes, which at the intercession of a priest they kept for slaves. This man, being one of them, happened to be sold first to the mines, where he says he cleared at least 3 pieces of 8 a day for his master, and from thence he was sold to this place. By this we may see that a mighty advantage the Spaniards make of their Slaves to employ at these Mines, which are accounted the richest in New Spain. The rest of the free Negroes being farther up the Country, could have no opportunity to escape. This is enough to shew what merciless and cowardly Enemies we have to deal with in these Parts of the World. I have heard of many such Cruelties in the Spanish Parts of America, to the eternal Scandal of those who encourage or connive at them. July 17. About 10 this Morning, the 2 Morels, Mr. Navarre and his Son in law, our old Prisoners, came in a large Canoe, with some Money to ransom what they could of us. We told them of the Barbarity of their Countrymen, and of the different Treatment they met with from us, and that we had reason to apprehend, that if we became Prisoners here, that few of us would ever return to our native Country. July 18. A Negro belonging to the Dutchess was bitten by a small brown speckled Snake, and died within 12 hours, notwithstanding the Doctor used his utmost endeavours to save him. There's abundance of Snakes on this Island, and the Spaniards say some are as thick as the middle of a man's thigh. I saw one as big as my leg, and above 3 yards long. Their bite proves generally mortal. Yesterday in the afternoon we had a consultation, and agreed that the small Bark we took belonging to the Main right against this Island, should be given to the Lieutenant's brother that we plunder'd, and who came over with our Bark. For being a man in some authority ashore, we hope this Favour will have some influence on 'em to trade with us whilst we are here. This morning Mr. Morell and Navarre went a second time in our Bark for money. One of the same sort of Snakes that killed the Negro was found on our Forecastle this morning, and killed by our Men. We suppose it came aboard on the Cable, they being often seen in the water. July 19. We continued discharging the Galleon, and lading the Marquis, and put a part aboard of us and the Dutchess. We found in the Marquis near 500 Bales of Pope's Bulls, 16 Reams in a Bale. This took up abundance of room in the Ship. We throwed most of 'em overboard to make room for better Goods, except what we used to burn the pitch of our Ships Bottoms when we careened them. These Bulls are imposed upon the People, and sold here by the Clergy from 3 Reals to 50 pieces of 8 a piece, according to the ability of the Purchaser. Once in 2 years they are rated, and all the People obliged to buy them against Lent. They cannot be read, the Print looking worse than any of our old Ballads, yet the Vulgar are made to believe it's a mortal Sin to eat Flesh in Lent, without being licensed by one of these Bulls, the Negro Slaves not being exempted. This is one of the greatest Branches of Income the King of Spain has in this Country, being a free Gift from the Pope to him, as the Spaniards and Natives told us. We should have made something of them, if we had taken the Bishop before mentioned, but now they are of no use to us. July 20. At noon Navarre returned with a little more Money, some Limes, Fowls, &c. He told us he had left Mr. Morell to get more, and that he would be soon with us. July 21. We sent aboard the Marquis 2 of our main Deck Guns, and the Dutchess did the like, which with 4 we took at Guiaquil, and 12 taken in the same Ship, make 20 good ones. The Carriages are all new, or very much repair'd, and as good and strong as if mounted in England. Another Canoe came with Limes, Guavas, and other Fruit, and brought a little Money to trade with us. The Main here is a poor Country, and I believe we might have picked up a good quantity of Money anywhere else on this Coast, notwithstanding their severe Orders against trading with us. July 22. 2 of our Negroes and 3 of the Dutchess's ran into the Woods to hide themselves, and go to the Spaniards after we are gone. We caught one of 'em to day, and punished him severely. July 23. At 6 last night our Stream Cable broke, and we lost our Anchor. The Ground here is a black Mud, which in all hot Countries rots Cables in a very little time. We have often Thunder, Rain, and Lightning all night, though clear dry Days. This accounted by the Spaniards the worst part of all the Coast for wet dirty Weather. We have had enough of it, but God be thanked are now pretty well, there not being above 30 Persons in all our Ships unhealthy. July 24. We caught our Negroes that ran away, and one of the Dutchess's, hunger having brought 'em out of the Woods. July 25. I put 35 Men aboard the Marquis, and Captain Courtney 26, so that her Complement will be 61 white Men, and 20 Negroes. Captain Edward Cook Commander, and our Second Lieutenant Mr. Charles Pope his Second. We designed to agree that the Captain with his Officers and Men shall have equal Wages with others in the like Posts to encourage them. July 26. Last night the Marquis sprung a leak, and made 8 inches water in an hour, but the Carpenters stopped it. A Canoe came from the Main, and bought some Negroes of us. July 27. At 8 this morning the canoe returned with Mr. John Morell, who desired he might go ashore to his brother, and forward his getting of more money to deal with us for goods, since he saw that we were resolved to leave nothing of value behind us. July 28. Yesterday afternoon Mr. John Morell returned, having met his brother coming with what money he could get. He told us the country being alarmed, he had much ado to get leave to come to us, that the Governor of Barbacore was at the water side, with above 200 men commanded by himself to prevent our landing, or that anything should be brought to us, and that all the shore was lined with men for that end. We have took out of the galleon 320 bales of linen, woolen, a little silks, and most sorts of goods, usually in bales, besides boxes of knives, scissors, hatchets, etc. The Dutchess and Marquis have also taken what they can, so that all our 3 ships are full. We found aboard the galleon a great quantity of bones in small boxes, ticketed with the names of Romish saints, some of which had been dead 700 or 800 years, with an infinite number of brass medals, crosses, beads, and crucifixes, religious toys in wax, images of saints made of all sorts of wood, stone, and other materials, I believe in all near 30 ton, with 150 boxes of books in Spanish, Latin, etc., which would take up much more stowage than 50 tons of other goods. All this came from Italy, and most from Rome, designed for the Jesuits of Peru, but being of small value to us, we contented ourselves to take only a sample of most sorts to shew our friends in England, and left the rest. A large wooden effigies of the Virgin Mary being either dropped or thrown overboard from the galleon, and drove ashore near the north point of the island, the Indians that came in the canoe with Signor Morell, etc., from the main land, being then a fishing, took up the image and brought her in the canoe to the shore just over against our ship, where we gave our prisoners liberty to walk that day. As soon as they saw her, they crossed and blessed themselves, and fancied that this must be the Virgin Mary come by water from Lima or Panama, to relieve them in their necessity. Then they set it up on the shore and wiped it dry with cotton, and when they came aboard told us that though they had wiped her again and again, she continued to sweat very much, and all but those employed in wiping her stood around devoutly amazed, praying and telling over their beads. They also shewed the cotton to our linguist and the ransomers, wet by the excessive sweat of the Holy Virgin, as they fondly seemed to believe, and kept it as a choice relic. The Morells perceiving me to laugh at the story, they told me a much stranger, in order to convince me, viz. that a few years ago, at a procession in the Cathedral Church of Lima, which was at that time very richly furnished, and worth some millions of pieces of 8 in gold, silver, and jewels, the image of the Virgin was more richly adorned with pearls, diamonds, and gold than the rest, and those ornaments being left in the church according to custom, till the night after procession, without any guard, because the people concluded that none durst be so sacrilegiously impious as to rob the church. An unfortunate thief, resolving at once to enrich himself, got into the church at midnight, and made up to the image, but whilst he was going to take off a rich string of pearls from the Virgin's wrists, she caught him fast by the arm, and held him, till, being found in that posture, he was apprehended and executed. This story was confirmed as an unquestionable truth by all the other prisoners, who assured us that all the fathers of the Church of Lima confidently affirm the same, as well as a considerable number of lay brethren, who, they say, were eye-witnesses of it, so that it passes amongst them as current, as an article of their faith. By this we may see how the belief of those false miracles by the cunning of the Romish clergy in these parts obtains credit among those men who are not so easily imposed on in their worldly affairs. Thus, I am apt to believe those gentlemen invented the story of the sweating miracle, out of zeal to their church, and thinking thereby to deter us from carrying away any more of the relics out of Signor Morell's galleon. Before this, when I heard such stories, I took 'em to have been invented merely to ridicule the Romanists, but when I heard such silly stories related by 8 grave men, of a handsome appearance and good reputation amongst the Spaniards, I was convinced of the ignorance and credulity of the Papists. July 29. Having for a long time been importuned by the companies of each ship to divide what we was forced to agree to as plunder, we resolved on a committee to be called to morrow to settle that affair, which we did in the following manner. At a committee on board the Duke, the 29th day of July, 1709, it's agreed that the following articles shall regulate plunder, and be in part a satisfaction allowed by the committee of the Duke and Dutchess for past services, more than each man's agreement with the owners. Impress. Gold rings found in any place except in a goldsmith's shop is plunder. All arms, sea books and instruments, all clothing and movables usually worn about prisoners, except women's earrings, unwrought gold or silver, loose diamonds, pearls, or money, all plate in use aboard ships, but not on shore, unless about the persons of prisoners, is plunder. All manner of clothes ready made, found in the upper deck and betwixt decks belonging to the ship's company and passengers is plunder also, except what is above limited, and is in whole bundles and pieces, and not opened in this country, that appears not for the person's use that owns the chest, but designed purposely for merchandise, which only shall not be plunder. And for encouragement we shall allow to James Stratton 40 rupees to buy him liquor in India, in part of amends for his smart money. To William Davis and Yerrick Derrickson, 20 rupees each as smart money over and above their shares. We also give the boat's crews over and above their shares that were engaged with the Marquis when taken 4 bales of goods, to be sold when and where they think convenient, which bale shall be 1 of serges, 1 of linen, and 2 of baize, and this over and above their respective shares. Also a good suit of clothes to be made for each man that went up the river above Guayaquil the last time in the Dutchess's pinnace. In witness whereof we have hereunto set our hands the day and year above mentioned. Thomas Dover, President, Woodes Rogers, Stephen Courtney, William Dampier, Edward Cook, Robert Fry, William Stretton, John Connolly, William Bath, Thomas Glendall, George Milborne, John Bridge, John Ballet, Lancelot Appleby. The cause why we delayed adjusting what should be plunder so long was the unreasonable expectations of some among us. This made us wait till now we had a proper opportunity, and could better insist on our owner's interest. Besides, we were not willing that any difference should arise about this knotty affair, when the prisoners were on board, nor till we had finished the rigging of our ships, lest it should have put a full stop to our business, or at least have hindered our proceeding cheerfully. July 30th. We overhauled our plunder chests, and what was judged to be plunder, by men appointed with the owner's agents, was carried aboard the galleon, which was kept clear between decks in order to divide it. Mr. Fry and Mr. Pope were to be the appraisers for the Duke, and Mr. Stratton and Mr. Connolly for the Dutchess, so I hope to get over a troublesome job peaceably. July 31st, Mr. Navarre's bark grew leaky, and Benjamin Parsons, one of our midshipmen that had charge of her, ran her ashore without orders at high water, thinking to have stopped her leak at low water, and got her off the next tide. But contrary to his expectation, the vessel strained and sunk, so that we had much ado to get out what we had aboard her, time enough, and were forced to leave in her 10 bales of damaged base, and a great deal of ironwork, which we gave Signor Navarre, in part of payment for what we have received of him from the settlement on the Main. August 1st. The officers we appointed to praise the plunder met on board the galleon, and valued the clothing in order to divide it amongst the officers and men of the ship according to their respective shares. August 2nd. We continued appraising the plunder, and found it a very troublesome task. August 3rd. Captain Cook told me they had discovered another leak, and was troubled at so many leaks in a harbor, so that I began to dread that all our labor and time was lost on the Marquis, but hoped for the best. August 4th. Yesterday in the afternoon they made an end of appraising the clothes at a very low rate, amounting to upwards of 400 and the silver-handled swords, buckles, snuff-boxes, buttons, and silver plate used aboard every prize we took, and allowed to be plunder at 4s. 6d. per piece of 8, amounted to 743 15s, besides 3 12 2/3 of gold, which was in rings, gold snuff boxes, earrings, and gold chains taken about prisoners. This I believe to be an exact account. This morning we had like to have a mutiny amongst our men. The steward told me that several of them had last night made a private agreement, and that he heard some ringleaders by way of encouragement boast to the rest, that 60 men had already signed the paper. Not knowing what this combination meant, or how far it was designed, I sent for the chief officers into the cabin, where we armed ourselves, secured 2 of the chief of those mutinous fellows, and presently seized 2 others. The fellow that wrote the paper we put in irons. By this time all hands were upon deck, and we had got their agreement from those who were in the cabin, the purport of which was to oblige themselves not to take their plunder, nor to move from thence till they had justice done them, as they termed it. There being so many concerned in this design, Captains Dover and Fry desired I would discharge those in confinement upon their asking pardon, and faithfully promising never to be guilty of the like, or any other combination again. The reason we shew'd them this favour was that there were too many guilty to punish them at once, and not knowing what was designed aboard the Dutchess and Marquis, we were of opinion they had concerted to break the ice first aboard the Duke, and the rest stand by them. Upon this I used what arguments I could offer, shewed them the danger and folly of combinations, and exhorted them to believe they would have justice in England, should anything seem uneasy to them now, or in the whole course of the voyage; adding that we had done all that we could for their good, and would continue our endeavours, not doubting their good intentions, provided they were not misled. With these and other healing arguments all appeared easy and quiet, and every man seemed willing to stand to what had been done, provided the gentlemen that were officers and not sailors amongst us had not such large shares, which they alleged was unreasonable, and that they could not possibly in a privateer deserve what they were allowed in proportion to the rest of the ship's company. This we did in part yield to, in order to appease those malcontents, by making some abatements on Mr. White's, Mr. Bath's, and Mr. Vanbrugh's shares, so that we hoped this difficult work would, with less danger than we dreaded, be brought to a good conclusion; for disputes about plunder is a common occasion of privateers quarrelling amongst themselves and ruining their voyages. Sailors usually exceed all measures when left to themselves, and account it a privilege in privateers to do themselves justice on these occasions, though in everything else I must own that they have been more obedient than any ship's crews engaged in the like undertaking that I ever heard of. Yet we have not wanted sufficient trial of our patience and industry in other things, so that if any sea officer thinks himself endowed with these two virtues, let him command in a privateer and discharge his office well in a distant voyage, and I'll engage he shall not want opportunities to improve, if not to exhaust all his stock. Had Captain Courtney and I kept what is always allowed to be plunder in privateers, and not voluntarily given our parts amongst the men, but for a greater and more generous design in view, viz. the good of the voyage, our parts of the plunder would have been above 10 times so much as it is now, because very little valuable plunder was taken out of any place but the great cabins, and all this in every prize is of right due to the commander that takes it. But if we had acted thus, we foresaw the fatal consequences that we must have suffered by it, for the officers and crews would plunder unaccountably, as is too often practised in privateers to keep their men together, though but meanly to their duty, so that we, to preserve a good discipline, gave an eminent example to them, of preferring the common interest before our own, to our particular loss. We have had lately almost a general misunderstanding amongst our chief officers, and some great abuses which I suppose sprung at first from several unhappy differences arising at and before our attempt on Guiaquil. This made me so particularly relate all that passed material in that attempt, so that I doubt not any one's contradicting this journal to my disadvantage. Yet in differences of this kind amongst the sailors we all join, and I hope agree, though I long for a reconciliation and good harmony amongst us, which is so essential to the welfare of the voyage, but not being willing to make the reader a party taker, or trouble his patience to read over unreasonable feuds, I have left them as much as possible out of my journal. Captain Morrell, that went for the Main to get victuals, returned. The negro we caught first and punished, we kept in irons, but this night missed him. We supposed he got his irons off and swam ashore. We had the following committees, confirmed the officers of the Marquis, agreed to sell the bark and her cargo, got off all our wood and water, and made preparation for sailing. We designed to leave the launch we built at Lobos with Signor Morels and Navarre, being of no further use to us, though hitherto she had done us very good service. Here follows what we agreed on in council. At a committee held on board the Dutchess, riding at Gorgona, August 6, 1709. We, whose names are hereunto subscribed, appointed as a committee on board the ships Duke and Dutchess, do hereby empower and order Captain Cook to command the Marquis, Mr. Charles Pope Lieutenant, Mr. Robert Nolman Master, Mr. William Page Chief Master, Joseph Parker Second Mate, Mr. John Ballet Doctor, Benjamin Long Boatswain, George Knight Gunner, Edward Gormand Carpenter, and other officers as the captain shall direct aboard the Marquis. Each of the above officers or the others on their good behaviour, to have such wages as those in the same office on board the Duke and Dutchess, and to cruise on this coast in our company, or where else Captain Cook shall think convenient, in his return to Bristol, should he be unfortunately separated from us. Witness our hands. Thomas Dover, President. Woods, Rogers. Stephen, Courtney. William Dampier, Robert Fry, William Stratton, Thomas Glendall, John Connolly, William Bath, George Milburn, John Bridge, Lancelot Appleby. Memorandum. We have now done careening, fixing, and loading our ships with the Marquis, and taken all manner of goods out of our prizes, as much as our ships can carry, having received a valuable consideration of Mr. Morel and Navarre, the masters of our 2 prizes. We are all of opinion that we had best leave them in possession of their ships, and what negroes we can't carry, hence our present circumstances and the condition of the prizes not allowing us to remove them from this place, could we make ever so great advantage of 'em elsewhere. So judge it our present interest to ply to windward, to try for other purchases and sale of the goods, and if possible to take or buy provisions. We all agree to land one of the Guiaquil hostages at Manta, in order to procure money to pay for the ransom of the town, and a bark we have sold the same man, laden with prize goods. Witness our hands this 6th of August, 1709. Thomas Dover, President, Woodes Rogers, Stephen Courtney, William Dampier, Edward Cook, Robert Fry, Charles Pope, William Stratton, Thomas Glendall, John Connolly, William Bath, John Ballet, Lancelot Appleby. I drew up the following agreement, to which we officers swore on the holy evangelists, because I thought it the most proper method to prevent the confusions which were like to happen among us, because of the jealousies that were entertained of one another, and came to such a height that I feared a separation. We, having made a solemn agreement, do this instant sign voluntarily, and give each other our oaths on the Holy Bible, and as we hope for forgiveness of sins and salvation by the alone merits and intercession of our blessed Lord Jesus Christ, to keep severely and strictly this serious concerted memorandum. First, we agree to keep company and assist each other on all occasions, and with all necessaries, as far as our abilities reach and our common safety requires. Secondly, that in case we engage at any time with the enemy, we design it in consort ship, and that each commander and second in each ship hereto subscribed shall on all occasions, without the least reserve, and to the utmost of his power, be forward and ready to assist, rescue, or defend each other, with the utmost dispatch, bravery, and conduct, even to the apparent hazard of his ship and all that is dear to him. Well knowing all of us that on whatever occasion should either of our ships be deserted by the other 2, and taken or lost in these barbarous and remote parts, it's very improbable ever the men will get home, and the survivors would be in as bad, if not a worse condition than the dead. On these and the like considerations we do hereby solemnly agree never to desert each other in time of need, if possibly we can afford it, and to be, to the utmost of our power and knowledge, alike brave in attacking or defending ourselves against the enemy to the last extremity. But if we are so unfortunate to see one ship inevitably perish, then the 2 remaining, after they have used their utmost endeavours for the distressed ship and find all past recovery, may then agree on the best methods for their own security. The like for one ship if 2 are lost, but for no other reason, to desert this firm and solemn agreement of consortship, and to shew that none of us is so unbecoming a man as to shrink back or slight this agreement in time of action, we agree it shall not be altered without the consent of all us 3 commanders and the major part of the officers hereto subscribed, and to a duplicate in each ship of the same date in Gorgona, the 6th day of August, 1709. Thomas Dover, President, Woodes Rogers, Stephen Courtney, Edward Cook, Robert Fry, William Stratton, Charles Pope, Charles Connolly, Thomas Glendale. Another paper was also drawn up for every man to swear what clothes, goods, etc. he had received of the agents, and to restore whatever he had taken without the agent's knowledge, in order to a just distribution of the plunder, and every one was to oblige himself in a penalty of 20 shillings for every shilling value that could be found about him concealed, besides the former penalty agreed on of losing his share of any prize or purchase for concealing above the value of half a piece of 8. And for the encouragement of discoveries the informer was to have half the penalty, and the protection of the commanders. This paper was objected against by several of the officers, who insisted that there ought to be a greater latitude allowed them to advantage themselves, since they had ventured their lives hither on so difficult an undertaking, which made us defer the signing till a better opportunity, for unless such agreements as these had been constantly promoted, as occasion required, the temptation of interest would have made us all fall into irrevocable confusions abroad, which generally end in a separation or worse.